Hi, and welcome to Metaconscious Leaders with me, Greg Suart, and my guest today, who is a highly successful entrepreneur, author, and leadership coach with a career that has bridged technology, media, and mindfulness. He began his professional life as a computer programmer after studying computer science at Manchester University and later trained in Transcendental meditation. He blended his spiritual grounding with an entrepreneurial spirit and went on to co-found Cable London, one of the UK's first TV and telephony companies, and later launched Broadsystem, pioneering interactive services for newspapers and television. He sold Broadsystem to News International after a rapid 4-day deal with Rupert Murdoch, thus marking one of the many ventures that established him as a creative force in the evolving media landscape. But a cancer diagnosis in 2000 reshaped his path, leading him to step back from building companies and focus instead on mentoring, coaching, and writing. Today, he advises boards, supports leaders, and writes books that blend business insight with humor and humanity, including Authentic Entrepreneur and Wildcard, which is a satirical business novel. His ethos is rooted in authenticity, resilience, and compassion. He believes business should be commercially successful and deeply human, saying that it should be right for you, right for the world, and right for the future. Our guest today is Stephen Kirk. Welcome to Metaconscious Leaders, Stephen, and thank you so much for putting your time aside to talk with us today.
Thank you for inviting me.
I have your two books here, Stephen.
It's
The
coincidence I got them as well.
Authentic Entrepreneur,
Yes.
which I've read. It's a good read. I recommend it. I
Thank
also have Wildcard here, which is your satirical novel. I believe that everything in there is true or happens sometime to somebody, although the names change, except for one item,
Correct.
which means that it could be any item, which gets you off a hook, doesn't it?
I know which one it is, but yes.
I'm not expecting you to divulge it in this conversation, but I haven't read. I'm into it enough to know that it's not going to take me long to read because it's a very good read.
Thank
And
you.
Stephen, have you thought about a movie? I think there's a movie in there, isn't there?
Well, if I had to talk, several people have said to me that it would make a good TV series, a spin-off of The Office, for instance. And a couple of people have said, well, why don't you do a movie? And the answer is that life is too short. So I'm hoping that maybe someone who has experience in these matters, I mean, I have connections, of course, but the other issue for me is I hate putting myself forward. I'm very shy. I know that you'd probably find that very difficult to believe, but I keep quite a low profile. So I believe in fate, really. It would be nice. And thank you. A number of people have agreed with you there.
Well, I look forward to it, and I put it out there into the universe that it might come about.
That's
And with that intention, we'll see what happens.
indeed.
Your life, Stephen, is a fascinating blend, I think, between business entrepreneurship with emotional and spiritual thinking, spiritual seeking. And these are key themes here on Metaconscious Leaders. For you, when, where, and how did these roots begin to appear, grow in your life?
They began deep in my childhood when I was very young. My mother suffered mental issues all her life and was in and out of mental hospitals. And my background was strict Jewish. This means actually it's a cultural thing, is what I'm talking about. But the long and the short of it is my father had very strict rules about what I should do, who I should be friends with, and who I eventually might marry. He had, in one of the number of rather funny things, if you like to put that word, in my family, was that his sister went to Israel, went on a kibbutz. She met her future husband there, and they both converted to Jehovah's Witnesses. And my father never spoke to her again. So what with my mother and my father, the overwhelming thought in my mind, which kept coming to me, was this is just a phase, that really life isn't like this. This is just, and it was very clear right from a very early age. And I always envisaged when I was old enough getting on the 253 bus to Camden Town, where there was a folk centre. And one day I was old enough, and I remember getting on that bus and thinking, at last, I'm free. I can go where I want. If I want to go and hear an English folk group, I'm free to do it, which I kind of a bizarre thing to even be thinking. But that's how
Yeah.
my family was.
Yeah. Was that it sounds as you tell it, almost a transcendent type of awareness.
Yes, yes. Well, the other thing about my life is it's full of these remarkable coincidences. And you mentioned my interest in transcendental meditation. This came about purely because I went to Manchester University, and there's a Jewish, by the way, I don't adhere to any religion now, but at the time I was sort of growing out of it, if you want to put it that way.
Yeah.
And the Jewish Community Center, and that was run by a guy called Rabbi Alan Unterman. Alan Unterman was the son of the rabbi that my family had in Stamford Hill, where I was brought up.
Right.
Bizarrely, when he met me, he said, "This is amazing. My father always said to look out for you and look after you." And I didn't know what he was talking about, but here you are. There's a teacher of transcendental meditation who is Jewish teaching here at the weekend, and I think you should learn. He knew about my family history, and it was there was bizarre on a number of levels. One, that he'd been told to look out for me, and secondly, that if I had learned transcendental meditation without his recommendation as the rabbi's son, my father would have gone ballistic.
Right.
And parents were completely baffled, like, well, we can't stop this. But on the other hand, what on earth is going on? So that's what happened there. And then well, that's as far. Sorry, that's that answer, I think.
No, no, don't apologize, because that was a kind of an early manifestation, if you like, of spirituality. I'm going to use that word but I realize that it is a word that means a lot of different things to a lot of different people. But for me, it means something more than mind and body. So with that meaning.
Mhm.
So indeed, the transcendental meditation, I think, had quite an immediate impact with you, didn't it? When you're doing your degree,
Yeah.
and you found that it led you to quite an interesting place, didn't it? With rather outstanding results.
Yes, I mean, I nearly failed my first year exams, and then I learned TM, Transcendental Meditation. In my final year, if I hadn't almost failed my first year exams, I would have got a first, as you probably saw in one of my books. My tutor wanted my exams to be remarked because she couldn't believe I'd done so well. I had done so well, and I got a 2-1. That was the best I could get there. And yeah, so she was completely baffled.
What was it about transcendental meditation that enabled you to achieve that?
Simply the fact that I stopped worrying. And I think, again, my wife would dispute what I'm about to say, but however much I worry today is significantly less than before. And when it comes to resolving problems, which I think she would agree with this, that my greatest attribute that came as a result or was enhanced by the meditation was an ability to resolve issues. One of the issues that needed resolution at that time was my nervousness in the exam room. So it was, I mean, before then, in my school days, for instance, I was top of the Latin class, except that when it came to the exam, the GCE, I failed. And my teacher couldn't understand it. He said, "You're so wonderful at Latin, fail." And I said, "No, it's as simple as that, that my brain stopped working." So there was calmness that came
Yeah.
about.
So is that, as I would see it, kind of being able to observe one's emotions and one's anxiety and know that it will pass?
To a degree, I don't actually think I'm any less troubled than most human beings.
Huh.
All I can say is that before I learnt TM, I was a lot worse.
Yeah. Yeah. Because I mean, for me, in my experience, as a kind of meditation enables me to get a kind of meta level of understanding. It's kind of it's almost like the butterfly, the helicopter that goes above the woods, and having seen the woods, then I can go back down in and I can deal with the issues, having knowing or being aware of a higher perspective.
Yes, that's a very nice way of putting it. I mean, I don't know how long you've been meditating. I've been meditating for over 50 years, and twice a day. I missed one meditation in 1978. I still feel bad about that.
Yeah.
And I'm used to being whatever it is I am. I mean, I don't analyze it in that sense. All I
Yeah.
notice is that when I'm faced with any problem, including business problems particularly, I will spot things that maybe other people don't spot. And
Mm.
that is my key attribute. So in building up the business ideas I had and resolving other issues that I've done with companies I've worked with. So that has come about naturally. The other thing that's happened recently more than ever is synchronicities. And this is all sorts of things happen that defy explanation. The latest one, if I may, is that I have a very old friend in Australia who came over to London for the day but didn't tell me. And the reason I know this is because my wife was teaching. She teaches Qigong, and she was coming out of the centre she teaches in Kensington, and she was walking to Earl's Court to come home. She suddenly had this idea that she should go on a side road. She had no idea why. She went on the side road, and who should she see looking in a department store but my friend, who'd come over for the day from Australia on her way to America and hadn't told me she was there. Which must have, she was seeing one or two close friends, but you only have a day. And there was my wife coming up to me and saying, "Hello, like, what are you doing in London?" And she kind of like, "Oh," and those sort of things seem to happen all the time.
Yeah, and you have an awareness of them as well. I
Oh,
remember Stephen when shortly after we first met, we met and then we met again in a park, and I think it was St James's Park or maybe Regent's Park. I can't remember which. Um, but we met, and you asked me a question, and I thought, how insane is that? Because that question, there is no basis on which you know to have asked that question.
I don't know what was
I can't remember what the question was, but I thought,
the
wow, that's psychic. That's right to the point. And I asked you then, my response was not to answer the question, but to say, do you always work with your antennae? And you said, yes, I always, pointing to your stomach. You said, I make my decisions down here. I bring them up into my mind. I organize them. I test them. I form them with logic, and then I give them out. And everybody thinks I'm a straight line thinker. But as soon as I lose the feeling, is what you said at the time, pointing to your chest. As soon as you lose the feeling, then you lose the interest. And that was one of the first things you said to me, which I thought I've
sound
always remembered.
right. I don't remember that, but I'd take your word for it. Yeah.
Yeah, no, I remember it very clearly. Yeah. So you started in computer programming. You
Yes.
then trained as a transcendental meditation teacher.
Yes.
And then you kind of pivoted again because that appears like a pivot. And then you pivoted again back into launching and pioneering media companies.
Yes.
Tell us briefly, give us a précis of what happened there.
Something took over. Um, the never understood what happened. But I was seriously going to teach transcendental meditation from my home with my then wife, and she carried on teaching it. But something took over, and there was a voice. I mean, my voice was saying, "You've got to go into business, mate." I had absolutely no knowledge of what that meant. I mean, my grandfather was a great pioneer, and he invented many things in the optical trade, but he could have done anything. I mean, he just happened to focus on optics and spectacle making. And he had a number of patents, for instance. I don't have the spectacle, but I'll get onto these spectacles in a minute. But they're the little wiggly things that go on your nose.
Yeah.
Of course, he invented that, had the patent for that. And these spectacles were actually designed by my cousin Jason. The family, after my grandfather went into optics, because he had done, but he was also a tap dancer, and for some strange reason they took on the optics rather than the tap dancing. which is lucky for me because I'm totally hopeless at tap dancing or any other dancing. Anyway, and that was the only thing I could think of, but I wasn't going to go into optics. There's no way I was going to go into optics, and I knew that. And my father wanted me to go into optics. And my parents were horrified, as I told you, when I started to learn to teach TM. It was like the last thing on earth they ever wanted me to be doing. But then when I said to my father, well, actually, I'm going to go into business, I don't know what that means. He said, well, you take over the family business. And I said, I'm not doing that. I can't do that. And he was very upset by that. But anyway, and then I thought, well, what can I do? And then, as I say in the couple of books, I didn't know what to do. So I was a computer programmer. I got some work as a computer programmer after finishing the Transcendental Meditation course. My entire life, I taught 11 people Transcendental Meditation when I had to get a job. And then I was introduced to a headhunter, and by somebody who I was working with as a programmer. The headhunter said, what sort of job are you interested in doing? I said, I want to work abroad, computers, I love television. And long and short, I got a job working for, as you may have seen, something that was selling view data, which was the precursor to the internet. Anyway, then I needed to, I fell out with one of the bosses. I had to decide what I wanted to do. I still hadn't started a business, which was my calling. And then there was an article in the Hampstead and Highgate Express about the government asking for people to bid for cable TV franchises. Now, I had no business experience whatsoever. I'd never done anything to do with forming a business or anything like that. So I put an ad in the paper saying, anybody interested in joining me to bid for the Camden cable TV franchise? And my philosophy to myself was, well, let me get someone who can chair me. Let me get someone who's an accountant. I'll do the thinking about how we're going to get this franchise. But I don't know what I'm doing, so I'll learn from them. I never looked at a balance sheet, nothing. So I got a copy of the franchise application, and I saw in it, most people think cable TV, it's TV. Cable is a cable and it's TV. But I saw in the franchise requirement that you had to show some knowledge of how you might provide telephone services on the cable TV franchise, which had never been done before. And it also said, how would you do if people wanted to pay per view? How would you have a sort of television license, library people could look at? Probably I could work that one out. So I then approached company Mercury Communications, who was an alternative to BT just starting.
Yeah.
I said, hey guys, do you know that you could provide a telephone service to my cable TV customer? And they kind of knew, but I said, oh, that's interesting. Well, have you got £100,000 you'd like to put into the cable application? Oh, yeah. And I went, and I realized you had to dig up roads, right? So I went to a company called Mid-Nicholas Construction. I said, you got £100,000, then you get the franchise. If we get the franchise, we can dig up the road. The £100,000 was a pledge if we got the license, so they could.
Right.
I raised, quite a lot of money just on promises, the application, and we got it. It's like nobody else had seen the thing about the telephony or and I got a library of films and TV shows that I could put up, for our customers. I signed a deal with MTV. I was the first company to sign a deal with MTV to provide their programming. And what I'm kind of getting at is that I saw things that were there. Anybody could see them, but nobody else had seen them. And on that basis, we got 5 London cable TV franchises, eventually taken over by Virgin Media. But so I think that answers your question.
Yeah, no, exactly. And then from there, you went on and established Broad System.
Yes, and that was because I was so bored with the cable TV franchise. Because I don't dig up roads. That's a picture of me actually digging up a road. It's a fake thing, but it's in the Gloucester.
I've seen it. Yes.
Yeah. It's the first picture. But I wanted that just to show that I did actually start a cable TV campaign.
I think you had your helmet on, but you didn't have your overalls on, did you?
No, I just had my helmet and a jacket and shirt. Anyway, all things sound so unlikely. But anyway, I was bored stiff, and I had been working my last job was working on a Granada television program, which providentially they'd put computer equipment into 1,000 homes, and they voted. They scored on a program called the Fame Game. You can still look it up. But there was you couldn't vote using a telephone. And so we had the studio audience that had voting, and 1,000 homes acts would come on and they'd vote. Homes would vote and so on. And I was responsible for the ensuring that all the technology worked. And I also was asked to do the warm-up, part of the warm-up. And I discovered that I can amuse people. So, which actually was interesting. So every week I used to not only make sure that I have my team who would make sure the technology worked, but also go and make the studio audience try out the voting and make them laugh. And the producer was always very kind of like, well, you kind of, you should be in the comedy. Anyway, and so I had done that. And then I thought, then I'd somehow, again, one of these things I saw, the British Telecom was now offering premium rate telephone services, which had never been done before. I saw that allowed people to vote. Most people then thought, let's do horoscopes and racing results and so on, which I did set up a company. I did start doing that. And I thought, hang on a minute, this means that from now on, all the audience of a TV show could vote, just as we were doing in the Fame Game.
Yeah.
And I had a number of ideas about that. Started off just doing newspaper phone-ins and stuff, like with the Daily Mirror newspaper. And then in a one very providential time, TVAM, who were the breakfast channel next door to my office, were being closed down. They'd lost their franchise. And happened, again, this is something else that seems to happen all the time. A friend of mine knew Bruce Gingell, who was the late Bruce Gingell, who was running TVAM. And he was only next door. So my friend said, you should meet Bruce, because I think you've got a way of making the shareholders money. And I went to see Bruce, who makes me look very normal, very eccentric guy, lovely guy. And he was actually bouncing up and down on his trampoline in the morning. He had an office trampoline. And so I'm watching him, and he says, have you got any ideas about how in our last 3 months you could make our shareholders some money? Because the franchise is closing. And I said, sure, give away a car. Never been done before. Also, you couldn't do it. You couldn't do it. The Independent Broadcasting Authority would not have allowed it, and British Telecom would not have allowed it, because it would have brought down the emergency. If you had all these people ringing a telephone number, it would have brought down the emergency services. So it was banned. So I said, okay, deal is you go and sort out the Independent Broadcasting Authority. I'll sort out British Telecom. And he said, well, if we do that, how much money would we make? I said, you make £1 million. No, for the shareholders. He said, wow, well, I think that's
Which is quite a lot in those days, wasn't it?
A lot of money. By the way, that was just a figure that came into my head. I mean, I had no idea how that was going to work. So I went to British Telecom and I said, look, with premium rate services, you share the money with the company that promotes the service, also with British Telecom, and you keep some. I said to British Telecom, look, if you do this, if you manage to get this competition on air, you'll make a ton of money and you'll be able to use it for lots of different purposes. And they said, well, funny you should say that, because we've just upgraded our telephone service. And funny you should say that, because we're actually introducing premium rate telephone services. So it's funny you should come about that. Give us a week and we'll clear it for you. And they did. Bruce went to the Independent Broadcasting Authority and they said, well, you're losing your franchise. And, well, it sounds quite exciting as a competition, never been done before. Okay, let's give it a whirl. So we did it, and I gave Bruce Jack for £1 million. We made £997,000. This, by the way, TVAM, for years they invited me after they closed to Christmas parties and things of the whole staff to thank me for doing this. But the point being that actually that was in a way made life more difficult for me, because everybody heard about this. And so all of a sudden I had about 50 competitors, and we were doing 50-50 deals, and people coming in were like 90-10 deals, which is totally commercially unviable, but we were losing business. And that's why in the end I had to sell it to News International, because they could offer me a solid revenue stream, and they did a deal with me, which made me much richer, I suppose you could say, than I was, and also cut a very nice profit sharing deal. Yeah, so that's my life story in a nutshell.
Yeah, and and that was a deal that you pretty much did personally, or you had personal connection with Rupert Murdoch in that. I think also at the same time wasn't Robert Maxwell was in the in the wings
Well,
as a possible buyer.
no, he'd actually withdrawn.
Okay, but you said in your book, this is what my question is kind of. That within the course of a year you had met Robert Maxwell, Rupert Murdoch, and the Maharishi Mahesh Yogi.
Yes.
And I don't imagine that you had them all around for dinner on the same occasion. That would be quite some
What's
occasion.
your question? Is it, did I have them all out for dinner? The answer is no, I didn't. No.
But I was, in terms of synchronicity, which you talk about, all of those three are big characters,
Yes.
and they all have a lot of narrative around them.
Yes.
People and they're controversial, they're notable for something or another.
Mhm.
Have you ever sort of thought about what they meant in the context of your life to you? Because they're big figures.
I haven't ever thought about what they meant in the context of my life. I think I needed to meet them for different reasons. Certainly, Robert Maxwell, who was my biggest client. So people would come into my life who would facilitate these meetings. I didn't do anything. I mean, let's be clear. I didn't know anyone, but I would meet people who seemed to know everyone. And in the case of Robert Maxwell, I know a guy called Colin Turner, who was a racing journalist, and he'd set up our premium rate racing services. And uh, when I realized that our profit margin was diminishing because of all the competition, I still had like 2 years before it would become an issue. But I thought, I don't need this. I can just sell up now. And if I have a newspaper group or television company behind me, we'd do a deal, and then I
Yeah,
wouldn't have a problem with competitors. So I said to Colin, can you introduce me to Mirror Group? Was our largest company that we work with. And I said to Colin, do you know anybody? He said, yeah, sure. A friend of mine close to Robert Maxwell. Long story short, I meet Maxwell and quite soon afterwards, and he sort of does a deal with me, but then his son materializes out of nowhere, and he's doing a similar thing in Australia. So Maxwell sends a message to people saying, sorry, he can't do the deal. And then again, the point you don't mention that it's so weird that you can't possibly, people will find it very weird. I then realized that I needed to sell the company. So I got an Indian ceremony done called a yagya, which was every day for 10 days. And they would chant. And I asked them to chant that I should sell my business. Okay, that was it. And on day one, the Mirror Group was still our largest customer. We had a car giveaway thing. Everybody wanted to do it.
yeah,
And that day, our computer was sabotaged. One of our competitors, I know who it was, had come in they'd paid a British telecom engineer to come and snap the cables to our computer. So no one could get through. And the Mirror basically went bananas, understandably, because they had hundreds of thousands of readers trying to ring in. They couldn't get in.
yeah,
So I came into the office first thing in the morning. Everybody came in all happy. Look, we got this Mirror thing. And then I had to say, actually, guys, this computer's been hacked. You can't get in. It's a pandemonium. And I said to I had a PA called Nina, who was a wonderfully eccentric woman. And I said, listen, it was an open plan office. I'm just going to sit on a cushion under my desk and drink a cup of tea and watch the world go by. Because everybody was like rushing around and trying to get it sorted. Really? I said, yeah. And the thing is, I don't want to talk to anybody. Okay. I don't know how we're going to get out of this. This is the worst possible thing I could possibly think of. We just technically lost a £3 million contract, our largest client. This was like the end of the world. And it goes back to what said earlier, like, okay, I'm not going to worry about it. Something will happen. And I said, I don't want any telephone calls. I don't want to be disturbed. So she said, okay, Stephen. I mean, she'd worked me long enough to know that I was a nutter. And I'm sitting under this watching everybody rushing around. And then she comes to me about 10 minutes later. I know you don't want to know this, but there's a guy on the phone from the Times newspaper, and he insists on talking to you. So I said, God, we had a small racing results contract with the Times. So I say, hello. It's a guy called Michael Hoy. And he says, hi, would you like to sell your company to Rupert Murdoch? No, our company wasn't for sale. Nobody knew anything. I said, well, I think I could consider that. And he said, well, go and meet a guy in the Stafford Hotel this afternoon called John Evans. And John Evans is looking for entrepreneurs like you who might be interested in working for News International and News Corporation. So, okay. So I met John Evans that afternoon in the Stafford Hotel. And we talk about nothing. I mean, doesn't really seem to know or want to know what I did. But when we talk about half an hour, we have a cup of tea. And he says, okay, I think Rupert should meet you. I'll call you over the weekend. I go home. By then we'd fixed the mirror thing. I mean, they let us off and it was all fine in the afternoon. I go home. I said to my then wife, most peculiar meeting. This guy told me he works for Rupert Murdoch and he'd ring me over the weekend and arrange a meeting. It's not going to happen, is it? It's ridiculous. Sunday night, I get a phone call from this guy, John Evans. What are you doing tomorrow morning? I said, I'm taking my car in to be serviced. And he said, okay, fair enough, but would you like to meet Rupert tomorrow? So I said, well, yeah, I guess that's a good idea. Why not? So I go and meet Rupert in Wapping. He's got about 5 of his henchmen sitting around. And we get on well. And also he knows someone I know, a guy called Suart, the late Suart Sheftel. And I knew Suart because I'd gone to America to do some due diligence with companies that were in a similar field, and Suart ran one. And we become friends. And he said, yeah, I know Suart. Rupert Murdoch says, okay, how much do you want for the business? Well, I made up a figure. I didn't know. So he said, okay. Then I go off with the News International accountant. We work out through the figures. He decides that's a reasonable figure. And then by Thursday, I met Rupert on Monday. By Thursday, we'd exchange contracts. In the meantime, I get a call from Suart Sheftel saying, oh, I hear you're selling your company to Rupert. I said, well, how do you know? He said, well, Rupert came out to me at a cocktail party and told me. And so that was it. And so, that's the story. And it's totally unbelievable, even when I tell you, but that's what happened.
Synchronicity, as you say, synchronicity. And it's your engagement with synchronicity as I see that.
Yeah.
It's being open to that which isn't apparent happening.
Well, it's unbelievable. Not only is it not apparent, it's unbelievable.
Well, it's unbelievable at a level of mind. I think it's unbelievable because it's not linear and it's not explainable.
Yes.
But in
Yes.
synchronicity terms, and
Yes.
synchronicity really invites in or points to something more than,
Yes. Yes.
then it's completely understandable because there are interrelationships and interconnectednesses that are happening all the time
Yes.
and are evident if we pay attention.
Yes. Actually, I didn't mention how I then went on to meet Maharishi, which of all the meetings, that was the most amazing meeting. And I got a call from a friend that was working for him. He was in Holland, and I got a call. It's very funny here. And the friend says, Maharishi wants to meet you. He's got something he wants to talk to you about. So I said, okay. So I had to fly to Holland, what was for allegedly a 3 p.m. meeting. And I had to get back next day for another meeting. I'm waiting. At midnight, I get one of my friends, colleagues, I should meet you now. And I go and meet him. There's only about 10 people in the room or whatever. And I'm looking at him, at Maharishi, and I see him turn into white light. Okay. I'm a skeptic, actually. You wouldn't believe it from the stuff I say, but I saw him turn into white light. And in the meantime, he's talking to me and turning into white light. And I'm thinking, this is quite odd. Anyway, he wanted me to set up a theme park, where people could have artificially created experiences of higher states of consciousness. It never happened. But it was one of the strangest meetings I've ever been to.
Will you say, because you talk about this in your book as well, will you say a little bit more about that transforming into to white light? Did he physically complete, was a white light that appeared around him, or did he literally, in your perception, change to white light? How would you
He literally changed
describe that?
my perception to white light. It's
So
simple as that.
the body didn't appear to be there, it's just white light.
White light. And then it would come back the body. And yeah, so I have no explanation for it.
Yeah.
That's what I saw. I wasn't on drugs. I
Yeah.
hadn't been drinking. That's what I saw. Yeah.
Yeah. I remember an occasion when on a perfectly normal day, one morning, I was going out emptying the compost, probably about 7, 8 o'clock in the morning. And I walked out of my flat, um, out onto the sort of the car park area. And suddenly, well, not suddenly, just everything was shimmering light. There was no physicality about
Yeah.
the environment. It was shimmering light and it seemed so natural. And I thought, wow. And it was just something completely different, ineffable. And it lasted for 2 or 3 seconds or something. It seemed like a long time, but
Yeah. I
it was
understand.
probably only 2 or 3 seconds.
I
But it
understand.
seems like a similar sort of thing where what we perceive is not what is fundamental. It's almost looking through the veil at something that there is beyond.
Yes. And I do wonder to this day whether he was waking me up to that realization.
Yes.
I don't know, but
Yeah.
it was odd.
Yeah, because other people probably weren't experiencing that.
I don't know.
Yeah, you don't know, but I have heard of other experiences where I heard of one person who was talking to a group of Chinese and English people. He was talking the whole time in Chinese. Sorry, he was talking the whole time in they were Japanese and English people. He was talking to them entirely in English. And
Yes.
afterwards, the English people felt very embarrassed and apologized to the Japanese people and said, really sorry that he spent the whole time talking in English. What's it like for you? And they said, well, we were feeling the same way because he was talking in Japanese, didn't speak any English.
Amazing.
So these things happen. So, back to your book, you say there that you follow your philosophy. You describe at one point as being follow your heart and consult your brain, which is very much what you were telling me when we first met. Your gut and your mind, and using the two of them, harnessing the intelligence of the body and modifying it and developing it further with the mind. And this kind of tension that there is between your spiritual theme and your business entrepreneurial theme, you take in your book, and you talk there about how your experience in large companies, in large corporates, you had learned a lot, but it had corrupted your moral compass,
Yes.
and therefore you kind of needed to move on.
Yes.
Say something about that, because I think this is probably quite a prevalent thing. A lot of people will resonate with this.
Well, when I was running my own business, I made a lot of mistakes, but also whatever, it worked. And I tried as best I could. I didn't do well enough because I was learning to make it more of a family business rather than, especially when we were small. And I'd take all the staff to staff meetings in Holland or Venice or wherever. And I tried to make this a feeling that it's our company. When I worked for other people's company, the thing I noticed that was most profound was that Mr. Murdoch asked me to join him in a meeting to go, and he was looking. I came into my office Sunday morning. There's a fax allegedly from him because I thought a bit weird. Want to join me? Come on my plane, and we'll go to Boston and look at this company I'm thinking of acquiring. And I'd just been taken up. It was really early days, and I think to myself, I don't believe this is coming from his office. It's a bit weird. Anyway, long story short, they pay for me to come over and meet him at the offices in New York. And he says, okay, we're going to Teterboro Airport. We'll fly to Boston, where this company that we're interested in taking over resides. Go on the plane, and there's about 5 henchmen. We were about twice my age at that time. And they're looking at me like, who's this,
Interloper.
interloper. And I realized that it wasn't only in news, but in companies generally, there's this idea of who's near the CEO, and, who's going to get drunk with who. And the whole idea of people being interested in developing the business is diluted into who is the nearest, closest, best relationship with the management team. And so the creativity that I wanted to see in other people around me, it was more about, well, how do I get on with the boss best, whoever the boss was,
Yeah.
and also orders would come down from the top and they would then be interpreted by people below and put into action in a way which might be completely the opposite of what the boss. And it came to a head really when I developed what would then be called Skype. So it wasn't Skype, but before Skype, I thought of a way that I was doing once I'd been taken over into having cheap telephone calls. Exactly what Skype was then to do. And I set up, you could do it. You could phone somebody else who was in part of the network and you could talk to them for free using the internet. But all these things are now commonplace, but it didn't exist. And then the accountant, financial director says, well, yeah, but how do you make money? And the point is, I said, I don't know. I have no idea. He said, well, we can't support that then, can we? And so that was the end for me, because I thought, this is the problem, isn't it? Well, the end for me was when I was diagnosed with cancer. But anyway, that was the beginning of me being falling out with this whole system, because I would just do it. And I would then look at how we could make money. And then if I'd have done it well, I would have been a billionaire, because Skype was sold for $1 billion. So that was the thing. So the idea that you'd sit and think of something and develop it, and then you might not know how it would make money, but you would look at how you'd make money and experiment. So that answers your question.
Yeah, no, certainly. To what extent was that a generational kind of thing that was happening? Because that was very much the case when I was in big corporate.
When you say, is it still like that? Do you mean...
have things changed?
Not to
within business, within big companies?
Not in big companies, no. I don't see it as changing in big companies. There are obviously exceptions, but the general rule is not there. However, there are more entrepreneurs now than there ever were.
Yeah.
Because there's less work than there ever was.
Yeah, there are fewer big companies.
Yes, and they'll get smaller. And so creativity is now more acceptable and more prevalent than I think it certainly was in my day. Right. See, what I did in my day would never been done before. I mean, there are very few people who are entrepreneurs.
Yeah.
Now everybody's. And that's great. I think it's fantastic. Because the other thing we have in this country is this sense of failure. It didn't work out, well, you're a failure. In America, you don't have that as much. But this idea that, well, basically you just do another thing, learn from your mistakes, move on, do another thing.
Is it right to sort of characterize this that at some point in time you had either a conscious or an unconscious realization that spirituality and business can or should be going together? And that you could bring that into the way in which you led and built businesses?
I never had any realization. I did what I did. I've always tried my best. But you see, the thing is, when I start saying tried and did this and did that, it sounds like I had some methodology. I don't live like that. It's commonplace now, and I find it very challenging that people need rule. I mean, the one thing that I always think about is, if everybody else is doing something, don't do it.
Yeah.
For everything. If they're all doing something, and I'm talking actually in the world, but because there's all these rules. I mean, I'd look at people doing business, still never done a business school, looking business degrees and so on. These are the rules. This is what you do.
It's all standardization.
Yeah. And I say, well, if those are the rules, don't do any of it. I mean, be open to doing it, but don't do it. I mean, don't just robot-like do it.
So you have though worked with the numinous, the ineffable, within your business practice, within your entrepreneurship.
Yes.
You've seen synchronicity happen and so forth.
Yeah.
And you're a coach and you're a mentor now.
Yes.
When you're talking to, let's say, a young entrepreneur, do you encourage them to bring these aspects into their own business practice?
Again, when you use the word that you're using, it implies I have a methodology, and I don't do methods.
Right.
So if I see that they're saying something, and again, it's all unconscious, but if I see they say something
Yeah.
and they move on, I'll say, you do realize what you just said, don't you? And this kind of could and can wake people up, because what I trained in coaching and NLP and all this, and then you have your rule book again. So I don't
Yeah.
do any of it. I mean,
Yeah.
trained in it so I can do it. But I think once I see that it's all been standardized and this is what you do, I think, well, forget it, because it stifles creativity. And then you might decide to do it, but don't just do it because it says so.
Are there some essential principles in there, though, around, let's say, self-awareness or paying attention or things like that, emotional intelligence, things like that, that enable people to find their own way?
Okay, so there I have a very clear idea, which is that most people override their inner feeling. This is the big problem for me to see, which is that most people will say, well, what I'm thinking is, but this is the rule. This is what I should. And I say, no, come back. At least give what you're feeling equal credibility. And there's this thing now, I don't know whether it's always been the case, that if you feel something, forget it. What's important is what's some guru saying? What is a business leader saying?
Yeah.
You know, what would Steve Jobs have done? And we seem to have, I think it's a case, and this is the big thing, which is that we tend to not take responsibility for our actions ourselves. We
Right.
always explain things, and it's because somebody says so. So, you can take it to the current political situation, which we won't go into in too much detail at all. But, we vote for a party. Why do we vote for a party? You know, why don't we just vote what we want for someone that at least says what we believe in?
Yeah.
And this is the way the world works now, probably always did. So I just think give more respectability, give more prominence to your inner feeling. And if you did that and if you followed it, then, and then people start arguing with themselves. I thought I should do this, but on the other hand, and then there's a whole intellectual thing. And I always say, well, yeah, but you thought you should do this. Maybe you should just do it.
Yeah.
Difficult though. People don't want to know. People want there to be some sort of rule book
Yeah.
in the main.
One of the things that I work with myself is intention,
Mm.
and intention with clarity
Mm.
and not holding on to it. So how I frame it in my mind is intention for the highest purpose.
Yes.
Um, and I must tell you how or what preceded the events that preceded your meeting, you and I meeting, which is along these lines, because I was I was talking to someone that you know well and is a long-standing friend of mine as well, Marcus Watson, and he said, come to this event that we've got, a Dorium event we've got, and I'll introduce you to Stephen Kirk. He told me about you, and he said, I'm sure you'll get along, well, and he'd be interested to talk to you. So
Mm.
I go along to this event. I meet him at the door. He introduces me to some people, and there are probably a couple of hundred people there, something like that. Quite a lot of people. And I'm looking for Stephen Kirk. And these people, when you're talking to them, they're not looking at you; they're looking over over your shoulder.
Yeah, yeah.
That was me pretty much all evening,
Mm.
wondering, Stephen's not in this. So where is someone who knows, where is Stephen? What does he even look like? And it was not a good evening. I was probably rude to people. I feel quite ashamed even talking about it. But I was invited back again to another one. And I thought, I got to do this differently. So I went in with the intention that I would meet Stephen Kirk were it for the highest good. And the deal I made with the universe was that whatever unfolded, it would my commitment was to be present, absolutely present with whatever happened or whoever I was talking to. And I meditated on it, and I went in, met Marcus. He immediately introduced me to someone who I think you know, well, you certainly knew then, Gordon Anderson.
Mm.
And I was absolutely present with Gordon. I had a lovely conversation. Very quickly, we were talking about some pretty deep issues. And it occurred to me then that the power of presence, and that
Mm.
when we are really present with somebody, stuff happens. You get very quickly to the point of meaning and purpose.
Mm.
And you're not so dancing around on the surface. This conversation with Gordon went on for quite a long time, though. And I began to twitch and think, hang on, whoa, bring myself back. Greg, no, your deal is to stay present. Yeah.
Yeah.
This is your deal. Stick to it for the highest good. And then his eyes wandered and he said, oh, excuse me, Greg, one second. Stephen, come over here. Come, Stephen, I really want to introduce you to Greg.
Yeah. Yeah.
Do you know what, Stephen? I can only remember that evening meeting two people. It was
Mm.
Gordon and you. We then
Right.
had a long conversation. We then did work after that together. And I just thought that was an extraordinary, for me, experience,
Yeah.
life experience of what working with synchronicity and that which is numinous, that which is beyond. It's as if there's an invisible hand also. So any other sort of numinous experiences that you've had or extraordinary experiences? Because let me tell you another little story. Let me put it like this. I think that many people, maybe most people, have experienced things that are inexplicable
Yeah.
in one way or another. Some won't be aware of it, or some won't acknowledge that it is inexplicable. They just say, oh, well, it's a coincidence or well,
Yeah.
whatever, who knows? But my thought is that within business, and we're talking here about the title of the podcast is Meta-Conscious Leaders.
Mm.
And in the vein of Einstein and the context of humanity at the moment and the kind of meta crisis or the poly crisis the challenges that we're facing this time. As Einstein said, we can't solve a problem at the level of thinking that it was created. We have to go to another level. So in terms of consciousness, go to a meta level, go to a higher level, understand the bigger picture, the interconnectedness, the interdependence, and then come back down into the weeds and get done what needs to be done, knowing the higher level. And so I talk to people who are senior in companies, and I can very quickly go off piste with them and talk about their experiences. There's somebody that I know who's senior leader in an insurance company. He was telling me about his astral planing experiences as a teenager, which he did at will
Yeah. Sure.
until at some point he had difficulty in getting back into his body, and that freaked him out. So he never did it again.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
I was saying to him, would you come on the podcast and talk about that? He said, no way, I'd lose my job.
Shame.
Now, because that's the formal structure. That's the formal structure of business. And that if you talk like that, then you're
Absolutely.
clearly loopy.
People think I'm clearly loopy. Don't get me wrong.
Well, correct. And if there's one thing that I would love meta-conscious leaders to make some contribution towards, it's normalizing
Yeah.
these kinds of experiences and this reality within a business context because it is relevant.
Now, I'll tell you, I have to leave shortly. So let me just tell you the strangest thing that's ever happened, which combines business, synchronicity, and weirdness. And that is that Louisa, my wife, and I used to go to Bali many years running, and she worked in a yoga studio there. And I had some shares in a company that was sold as we were there, and I wasn't expecting the shares to be sold, and it made quite a lot of money for us. And I was with a guy called Charlie, and Charlie was the manager of a yoga studio. So I said to Charlie, "You guys raising money by any chance?" And he said, "Oh, as it happens, we are." Me and 11 other people put money into this yoga studio, which still exists. It's very, very successful. However, the money didn't go to the yoga studio. It went other places. And the money disappeared. Long story, very short, because it took a couple of years for this to unfold. In the end, the money gone and seemed to be able to get it back. So Louise and I fled Bali, couldn't take the strain anymore because the investors including myself. They'd asked me to represent them to the studio and driving me potty. So we came home, forgot all about it. 4 years passed. I then get an email from the financial controller of the yoga place who said, "We're going to pay you back." And I said, "Great." Sunday morning it was. I just come out of the shower. And I said to Louise, "Let's go and have a cup of tea to celebrate in Regent's Park." And she said, "Are you balmy? I mean, why? They're never going to pay you back. You know, they've promised, and they've never done it." I said, "Listen, that we go to Regent's Park. It's a sunny day. I'll have a cup of tea. I'll be happy. And the worst that will happen is they won't pay me back, but I had a cup of tea and I was happy. The best that will happen is I have a cup of tea and they'll pay us back." So she says, goodness sake. So we stroll off to Regent's Park. We're sitting outside the cafe. And I'm looking at the toilet, and there's a guy who looks like Charlie. Now, Charlie had no financial interest in the business. He had nothing to do with what happened. But he was the reason we put the money in. Looking, I said, "It's Charlie." So I went up to him and I said, "Charlie?" "Oh my God, what are you doing here?" I said, "No, what are you doing here?" Charlie is American. He lives in San Francisco, spends his time between San Francisco and Bali. He said, I don't believe this." I said, and he didn't know anything about the shares or the money, nothing. And he says, "I don't believe this." I said, "Well, what are you doing here?" He said, "Well, I married a British girl and she had friends in your area, Malabar. We went out for lunch and
Yeah.
then we got back in the car. And just as we're starting to drive, she said, "Oh, I need to go to the toilet." And I said, "Well, where are you going to go?" She said, "Well, there's Regent's Park. They'll have a toilet." And so they rock up to Regent's Park. She's in the toilet when I see him, and she comes out of the toilet, and he's completely blown away because, like, the chances of me meeting him on the
Yeah.
morning, an hour after I get this email about the investment that I made because of him, it's just billions to one. And
Yeah.
I've never, I mean, and the timing, it was fantastic.
Synchronicity.
So, yeah, synchronicity. So that's the best answer I can give you. These things happen. And if you
Yeah.
just know that is so happening, you
Yeah.
can't, so, well, that's just, how many people in London? People have said to me, "How many people in London, what's the chances of," I
Yeah.
said, "Well, we're talking about people in London. We're talking about a completely different thing.
I think the more, in my experience, the more I pay attention to what's happening and watch what's happening and am curious about
Mm,
what's happening and
mm.
noticing all the different things, the more I see it
Yeah,
happening on a daily basis, sometimes very trivial, sometimes quite significant, and sometimes very often quite humorous as well.
yeah. But there's a lot of humor in the universe. Now, the point is that most people I tell that story to think I'm bonkers.
Well, you're on Metaconscious Leaders here, Stephen, so you're on safe ground.
Yeah, indeed. Thank you. But there are other people who are quite moved by that. And I
Yeah,
think it brings up some focusing on some awareness of these strange things that can happen. Because
absolutely. I'm inspired, therefore.
if you think it can't happen, it could happen all the time, but will never see it. And
Yeah.
so that is the best answer I can give to your question.
So, as you say, I'm aware you got time. You need to be moving on, Stephen. Just to close off, the context I mentioned a moment ago. The world has we as humanity are facing a number of monumental challenges.
Yeah.
How would you perceive? How would you describe, evaluate this era for humanity? And what role do you see business and business leaders playing in making some contribution to moving us forward and helping to resolve some of the difficulties that we're facing?
We can only bring in human, as I said earlier on, people now, they're running smaller, they're opening businesses for themselves and bringing in smaller entities into the world of business. And I think they can set an example by allowing their inner soul to come out and show itself in the business world. And I think this is happening. In terms of the larger world, I believe that we go through cycles. And actually, we went through, and there's not a lot you can do about this. I mean, this cycle will end and it will be replaced by a better world for a while. And
Yeah,
then we'll do it all again.
yeah,
And I can only imagine that in the terms of creation, there is a methodology in the sense that we have to learn some lessons. If you believe this is the only life you're ever going to lead, I don't know that I don't believe that. But if you believe that, then it kind of all seems a bit kind of terrible, isn't it? It's
yeah.
awful. But if you believe this is just a transience and that you might actually return to another phase of life, if you think that this is just a phase that is this life, and most people don't see anything else than this life, then if you see it as an adventure, it's not a great ending for some people. It's a terrible
Yeah.
ending,
Yeah.
but it's not the end.
Yeah.
For me, I don't believe it's the end, and this is purely a belief. I don't believe it's the end. I think that it's a phase. And at the end of this phase, which could get much darker, at the end of this phase, things will improve, I'm sure. Whether
Yeah.
we're able to see it or not is another matter. But it's a sort of inevitability. I mean, we're living through, in my opinion, the beginning of what would similar circumstances the Second World War. I mean, similar. It's a cycle.
Yeah.
I answer your question. Yeah.
Well, it does, and I very quickly resonate with that. I've had the privilege of a near-death experience, so I kind of have a knowing, well, I do have a knowing
Yeah,
that
yeah,
this is a place of transience.
yeah.
Yeah.
So we'll see. Things will get better, but how long, I don't know.
Stephen, this has been a wonderful conversation. Thank you very, very much for sharing your wisdom, your insights, and your story. It's wonderful. I think it's inspiring. I think that for me as well, it just underlines how when we're curious about life and go with it in a trusting way, then
Mm.
what can unfold is quite extraordinary. So thank you for your time. Thank you for your sharing. Be well, go well. Thank you.
Yeah.
I hope you enjoyed that conversation with Stephen as much as I did. And if you did, please follow us, like us, and share with friends and colleagues. And also leave a comment because it's very useful for us to know what you're thinking as well. Until next week, thank you for listening and watching. Be well.